Welcome to Billy Noel's Desert Island Tims. My guest today is the host of the very popular Beyond the Waves. Graham Wilson, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Billy. How are you?
I'm not bad. What was life like for you growing up?
Well, I was born in West Philadelphia, and the first question that many people give me is, was that near the Fresh Prince? And I could say it was not. I was born not too far from where the Fresh Prince grew up, but my parents, after a couple of years, moved to an affluent suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we certainly weren't affluent by any stretch ourselves, but we lived in an area that was. And, you know, there's certain challenges that come with that. Obviously, the kids that you grow up with, you know, having nicer things oftentimes, you know, that can be, you know, a bit of a stumbling block to you know, making friends and getting acceptance. But, you know, we did the best that we possibly could. My parents split up when I was about 3 years old, which, you know, many people often say, oh, that must be challenging, but I didn't really have much of a memory of my parents being together. So for me, that was just always the way it was. And as such, you know, given the fact that, you know, my mom specifically didn't have much, she was working 2 jobs oftentimes, putting herself through school. And that was difficult, but we had help from my grandmother and also my great-grandmother, who would stay with my sister and I, and had such a vital role in bringing us up. And interestingly, my mother's side of my family is Italian. So growing up, I just self-identified more as an Italian than anything having to do with Ireland or my Irish ancestry. My dad's side of the family was all Irish, but I didn't have much contact with my dad's family, and therefore I just wasn't exposed to it as much. Which is interesting, looking ahead now, you know, given the fact that I am such a student of Irish history and do self-identify as Irish. But, you know, as I mentioned, it was tough growing up because also we lived in an area that didn't have many kids that lived near us. So going to school and getting involved in sporting events for kids, it was often tough because many of those cliques were already developed and I wasn't part of any of them. So I was a bit of an outsider. And I wasn't always accepted, and that's tough for a kid, you know, when you just want to be accepted. But you know, I did the best I could with that. I had really bad teeth. You know, I was just very skinny, and there were a lot of challenges with that. But my mother was involved in a relationship with a man who was also Italian. His name was Nino, who in the Sicilian language, if your name is Anthony and you're Anthony Jr. or you're little Anthony, in Sicilian it's pronounced Antonino, so it's shortened down to Nino. And when you hear people being referred to as Nino, that's where it comes from. And this is how I got into riding Harley Davidson motorcycles. He was a big Harley guy. He was a biker. He had a beard, and you know, he was very formative in you know, how I grew up as well. So the summer between my 10th and 11th year, he suggested that I get a job, you know, which is a bit strange considering here in the States, you need to be 14 years of age in order to even get a part-time job. But he suggested that I go up to one of the local golf courses and get a job as a caddy. Now, in America then and even now, the job of caddy had been sort of relegated with, you know, the modernization of golf carts and so on, so that only the most affluent golf clubs would have caddies. And fortunately, about a mile from my house, there was one of these very, very rich. I mean, they used to make the joke, the money was so old at this place, they stopped counting it. But they had a golf club. So as a 5'1", 10-year-old, I walked up to the golf course, and I think I walked into like the clubhouse and the men's grill, and I didn't know where I was going. You know, they quickly showed me where I needed to go, you know, to inquire about it. And, you know, keep in mind, I'm by far the youngest person going up there. And I think that the caddies and the caddy master and the golf pro at the club sort of looked at me as a mascot of sorts. And that for me was, it was a powerful event. You know, I was all of a sudden being accepted. You know, granted, I was being accepted because I was this little kid and I showed some enthusiasm for this. And I started caddying, and I was actually really good at it. You know, a lot of the members really wanted me to be their caddy, almost as like a novelty piece, but also because I did well. So that acceptance that I got from that job really was and that one event changed my life probably more than anything else. You know, it directed basically the rest of my life was going to go. I was introduced to the game of golf. I started playing golf as a result and became quite good very quickly. So it was just the type of thing that really fed on top of each other. The more acceptance I got, the more I wanted to play golf, the more I wanted to caddy, and the better I got at golf. So the more acceptance I got, and it just sort of fed itself. And that leads us into our first song, which is Snap. It's back in the late 80s. The song was The Power, which, it's a great song in and of itself. But that summer, it really stood out to me because, I felt like all of a sudden now I had this power, where I was accepted. I felt like I had a place where I belonged, and I was really doing well. And I was also making a lot of money. I mean, the first week I started caddying, I came home with $200 US, which I've never seen $200 before in my life. And needless to say, when my mother discovered how much money I was making, she nearly fell on the floor. But it was a huge summer for me. So, all right, the first song being played here is Snap with The Power.
That was The Power and Snap. Could you tell me a wee bit more about Beyond the Waves?
Well, Beyond the Waves was started coming on 3 years ago. It's hard to believe, but at that moment, I'd just become completely obsessed, transfixed by Celtic. I had met up with several Celtic supporters throughout the East Coast, namely Seamus Cummins from Philadelphia, who I knew of almost a decade prior, but wasn't involved enough in the scene to feel comfortable approaching Seamus. Seamus was the president of one of the bigger Celtic supporters clubs in Philadelphia, so I knew of his stature, but I developed a relationship with him and had traveled back to Philadelphia. By this time, I had moved to Washington, D.C. with my wife. I'm originally obviously from Philadelphia, but I traveled back to Philadelphia, and some folks from New Jersey and central Pennsylvania would travel down as well, and we'd have just sort of an impromptu meetup for big games. So at the Scottish Cup in 2011, I believe, we were playing against Motherwell, and myself and everybody who knows the show knows the Rev, who's from central New Jersey, came down for that. And also Jim McGuigan from central Pennsylvania came to Philadelphia. And we just had an absolutely amazing time, sitting in the pub, singing songs and talking about the game and breaking it down, analysis and so on. And, what our frustrations were with the club and what we loved so much about the club. And I got to thinking, by that point, I became a huge fan of the Celtic Underground podcast as well as the Lost Boys, which were primarily the biggest two podcasts that were going at the time. But I didn't feel like the American voice, the Americans, not just the folks that made their home here but were originally from Scotland or Ireland. I mean, people that were born here, people that sound like myself with this accent. I didn't really quite think that we were getting the representation, that would have people aware that there are so many Americans here and so many passionate Tims that love the club and that really know their stuff. I traveled to Ireland, the previous summer with my wife. Actually, it was just a couple months prior to this event. And, what I was struck by was when I talked to people in Ireland who, to a man, basically they all said that Celtic was their second club. They were surprised, they were amazed that an American could speak so much about Celtic, about the history and about what was going on with the club just then and all of the sort of the topics of the day. And I wanted to write that. I wanted to send that message out there that, we are here and we love the club just as much. And I thought that, maybe folks would get a kick out of it. So when we first set up our Twitter account to get the message out that we were going to start the show, we had about 150 followers within an hour. So just from the get-go, it really took off, and I was just so moved by it. And it's interesting because, like we just talked about, I didn't really have much of a background that identified with the Irish culture or Irish heritage. They don't teach Irish history in the American schools, so you really don't have any exposure to it. Other than maybe some uncles singing Irish songs, and if my memory serves me, they were quite often rebel songs. There's no context to it. Where you can understand what was going on. Throughout my time in high school and then going into university, I was, as we just talked about, I was a golfer. I played golf, and I became quite good with it. And I identified as an Italian American because I was raised mostly by, my Italian grandmother and great grandmother. But as I got better with golf, I started winning tournaments. I was winning all of the many of the local and state tournaments and placing quite high up with the national tournaments. And that got a lot of attention. And Fortunately, I was able to get a scholarship to university. I went to Coastal Carolina, which is located in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And for those that aren't familiar, there's about 100 golf courses within a 90-mile radius. So it was just such an opportunity for someone who, was ambitious about golf, and at the time I wanted to be a professional golfer. So that was just perfect for me, and I had the ability to step right in and play right away. I got quite a substantial scholarship, and it was just an amazing opportunity. But it allowed me to step away from sort of an insulated youth and teenage experience where, I'd spend 6 in the morning. The time that I'd be at the golf club would be 6 in the morning until 9:30 at night. I mean, if there was daylight, I was at the golf course, and I didn't really do a lot of the things that teenagers do, getting into trouble, drinking or smoking or whatever, was going on. I sort of was sheltered. And when I went to university, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different people from all over the place, from the southeast of the United States, but also people from Glasgow, people from Wales, people from Sheffield, some of the banter, shall we say, from the Welsh guys and the Scots towards the guys from Sheffield was absolutely incredible. We'll just leave it at that. But I was also introduced to different music, and that gets us into our next song. As a introverted, very shy young guy going into university, I was pretty much scared to talk to a lot of people for fear of rejection or whatever. Going back to growing up and not having a lot of friends, but when I went to university and having these people around me that were so outgoing and who basically taught me to come out of my shell and just really be myself and just express myself and just unleash whatever I had within me was an amazingly powerful experience and really just sort of spurred me on for everything that I've done for the rest of my life. And the one song that really stands out, and it was right as I got to university. My pal from Wales, he had the whole list. I mean, Oasis was just getting going into, becoming a worldwide phenomenon. And Prodigy was huge. I mean, I hadn't heard music like this before, and just hearing the energy that it put out there was, I mean, it was almost just like it lifted me. So, the second song is Prodigy, the Firestarter.
That was Firestarter by Prodigy. Who were your influences and heroes, Graham?
Well, obviously there's a wide array of things that I've been into and involved with throughout my life. And, my parents have been, a huge inspiration for me and something that they've always been there for me to drive me on. Oftentimes I'm my harshest critic, and they're always there to tell me just every reason why I can do something when, it seems like I'm just down in the dumps and I think, I can't do this and I can't do that. And it's just been, I'm so lucky to have that, growing up and playing golf so much. I mean, I always admired Ben Hogan, because he was just, it was a bit further back. I mean, that's a couple generations before me, but it just, the way that he carried himself with just such calmness and just style and class was just so impressive to me. But one of the things that recently, and by recently I mean within the past 10 years or so, that I've become more aware of is spirituality. I've had some personal situations that have come up that have been quite challenging. Obviously, 9/11 was something that was close by to where I was at the time. I lost 2 friends in the Trade Center, and it really reshaped the way that I looked at the world, in terms of measuring my success and my happiness based on what I was accumulating, and really putting that to the side and thinking more about the spiritual aspects of life. What's it all about, and what is true happiness, and not to get all metaphysical and new agey with it, but this is really what was going on for me. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease around that time, and for those who aren't aware, it's an autoimmune disorder that can affect your digestive system, and it makes life generally very inconvenient, and it's very frustrating when your symptoms can't be controlled, and you basically feel like you're a prisoner with it. And fortunately, I've come to a point where I'm able to manage it and able to just live my life generally, through medicine and also, just through one of the things that I became involved with or started participating with was like transcendental meditation, and just starting to investigate more of religious aspects. I wasn't brought up with a lot of religion, but I read the Bible twice. I figured that if this was going to have so much of an impact on the world, I should probably know what it's about, rather than just saying, oh, I'm a Christian because my family was. I studied Buddhism. I studied Islam and different spiritual denominations and influences, just to try and give myself more of a perspective. Around the same time, my mother was involved in a very bad car accident where she was almost killed. They said that she was probably going to be a paraplegic, and there was going to be a lot of rehab associated with it. During this time, I started experiencing panic attacks, and I was passing out because I was not able to express my own grief at this situation, and I was internalizing a lot of it and trying to be strong for the rest of my family while I was caring for my mother. But meditation and just spiritual awareness and enlightenment really got me through that period. My mother, actually, to this day, she can walk, which her doctor told me it was a miraculous recovery. I mean, there was probably 3 people in his career that he would look back when he's done practicing medicine that he would actually remember him. He said my mother was probably one of them, and I was just so thankful for that. But I also started to broaden the type of music that I was listening to. Obviously, prior to all of this happening, and such a political transformation within the United States was happening as well, with the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and this militant sort of era that was taking place. It led me to sort of investigate some of the music that came about during the last militant era in America during the 60s. Prior to this time period, I didn't have much time for Bob Dylan, but when I investigated, I read a Dylan biography and started listening to the words that he was speaking about. I fell in love with his music, and it was the same thing with the Beatles. I didn't have much time for the Beatles, but in studying John Lennon and Paul McCartney and George and Ringo and studying their transformation, throughout their time together, and that musical influence that they had, it was a really powerful time, for me, and I just became transfixed by John Lennon specifically. I looked at him as like a modern avatar, of being able to communicate these spiritual ideas that were so against the realm of what was the norm and the establishment. And I mean the lyric, just chasing shadows on the wall, and investigating exactly what that means is just it was something that had a big impact on me. John Lennon probably is one of my biggest influences from that, in terms of looking at the world not just from the way that it's presented, but investigating what specifically is going on with that. So that leads us into our next song, which is John Lennon, Watching the Wheels.
Right, Graham, what got you into Celtic?
Well, that's probably one of the most commonly asked questions that I get. Obviously, listening to the way that I speak and the accent that I have, it's clear that I didn't grow up in Glasgow or in Ireland, or Scotland. So, how could this possibly have happened? Do my parents come from Glasgow, or were they Celtic supporters? And the answer there is obviously no. I didn't really have any sort of upbringing around Celtic. It came while I was in university, and I had a close friend of mine who was from Glasgow and who consistently would slag the NFL and the fact that it was rubbish and everything that comes with that. But he spoke so passionately about this club called Celtic. Now, my initial impression hearing Celtic and anything green and white at that time was very negative. Growing up in Philadelphia, I was a Philadelphia 76ers fan, which, for those who aren't aware, that's an NBA team. And one of their biggest rivals was the Boston Celtics, especially, as I was a child of the 80s, I was a fan of Dr. J, Julius Erving, and the Boston Celtics at the time had, probably one of the best teams that have ever been, with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale and Danny Ainge and Robert Parrish, and they used to always beat my team, my 76ers. And, so anytime I heard Celtic, I was like, oh, no, forget that. But as it was described to me, the history of the club and how it was formed, and, well, most importantly, it wasn't directly linked with the Boston Celtics. That sort of put me at ease. But the fact that a team that was created by a Marist monk and as a charitable entity became the greatest team that had ever been, and with the Lisbon Lions in 1967. And then obviously the transformation from that time on, the Quality Street Gang and bringing through players like Dalglish and Paul McStay. And the thing that really tugged at my heartstrings at that moment was, obviously the rivalry with Rangers and the history as well with Rangers and their non-Catholic policy, with signing only Protestant players until just before this particular time period. That's something for me that, my mother was Catholic. I wasn't Catholic, but many of my friends were Catholic, so that didn't sit right with me. And I stood with the side that was welcoming to anybody. That's the side that I want to be with. And knowing at the time, it was about 1998, the spring of 1998, hearing and knowing at the time that Rangers had won 9 in a row and Celtic absolutely had to stop them winning 10 in a row because that was the Celtic record. That was immediately enrolling for me. I just knew that Celtic had to stop that. And the first game that I saw was the last game of the season in 1988 against St. Johnson, when obviously Henrik Larsson and Howard Bratback scored the goals that day and stopped the Rangers from winning 10 in a row. My impressions from that day, comically, in hindsight, I just knew that there was some guy that had dreadlocks and stuck his tongue out like Michael Jordan, and another guy named Backpack. He scored the goals. I didn't know a midfielder from a sweeper, from a striker, from a keeper. I just knew that there were a bunch of guys running around in green and white, and they had the win. So, after that took place, I was so incredibly moved by the fact that, they had done it, and they had stopped Rangers, this evil entity, from winning 10 in a row. From then on, I was just completely hooked with it. And, growing up in America, at that time, there wasn't any exposure to Celtic. We didn't have any Scottish games on TV except for, the occasional Celtic supporters club that you could go into. But, I had a couple things going against me at the time. I wasn't even 21 yet, and you need to be 21 in order to get into a pub. I used to fake ID to get into the pub that day. But then secondly, as a young kid with so much else going on, university, paying attention to my golf, I had so much other things going on. And, without that constant reminder, it sort of fell by the wayside. Sure, if the conversation came up that, about football, then, I would identify myself as a Celtic man. But in terms of that regular routine exposure, it didn't really happen until a bit later. When I left university, I went back to Philadelphia, and I got myself into sort of the workforce, and I had some disposable income. I lived much closer to where the CSCs were. And now at the time, I was probably more, I had more experience with waking up, or not waking up at 7 a.m. as we typically have to over here to see games. I had probably more experience with going to bed at 7 a.m., given, it was my early 20s and I was sowing my oats, as they say. But, I made some friends in Philadelphia who, one friend in particular was from Belfast. And, when he started talking about football, I just sort of naively threw out there, without even knowing what his background was, and I was probably lucky, I threw out there Celtic, and he just sort of jerked back like, how do you know about Celtic? And he got me into going to, the local CSCs, and, there's some I had some insecurity about, sort of injecting myself too much in the conversation because I didn't sound like everybody else, but I loved going to the games and watching the games and getting involved with that. It was also an amazing time in Philadelphia from a musical standpoint. The R&B scene in Philadelphia in the early part of the millennium was just exploding. I mean, you had Jay-Z was, who obviously most everybody is aware of, was signing a lot of acts from Philadelphia, and that was just a great time for me. It really reminds me of that time, that I started becoming more involved with Celtic, learning more about Celtic and learning more about my Irish heritage. And specifically, the song that really stands out to me is by Freeway. And the name of the song is What We Do.
Right, Graham, what irritates you?
Oof, quite a lot. If you listen to any of my shows, a lot of the feedback that I get is that I'm quite often irritated. But yeah, I guess that just comes from, how passionate I am about Celtic generally. But in general, just having a lack of integrity. I I don't like to have a cynical view of the world, and that probably drives a lot of my passionate sort of ranting. I guess you could call it. I just want to be able to trust people and trust their word. When they give me the word that it's going to be good, and that I don't have to have this sort of nagging thought in the back of my head, like, all right, yeah, that's actually going to happen. When I was in university, obviously, as you can pick up, it's quite a transformative time for me. But I was in a what I guess would be a long-term relationship with a girl at the time, and it was when you're young, you have these relationships, and you just think, right, this is it, and we're going to be together forever, and so on. And it was quite nice, but unfortunately, again, given the fact that I was in this sort of affluent area, where I grew up, but I wasn't so affluent myself. Obviously, I was working during the summer, and many of my friends didn't have to. So we're quite close to New Jersey, the New Jersey Shore, as we call it, the Jersey Shore. And we'd go there on the weekends, and it's nice to be by the water, and there's a lot of young people, and you go out. And the girl that I was with at the time, she was from an affluent background. She spent the entire summer at the shore, and I was working during the week and trying to get down there on the weekends. And unfortunately, I caught her with one of my friends. I mean, it just completely destroyed me. When you have this buildup, like, this is quite possibly the person that I'm going to be with, this is it. And then, to have that sort of situation where you get betrayed like that from, not just your girlfriend at the time, somebody that you think so much about, but, one of your close mates as well. Who was involved. And I mean, that just threw me into a period of time where I was in a state of depression. It taught me a lot of valuable lessons, most notably, just don't be careless with other people's feelings. I think that's really, the type of thing. It's easy to be empathetic towards other people when, you're down on your luck or you're not having such a great time of it. But it's oftentimes hard to have that same sort of empathy when you're at the top. And that's one of the sort of situations when, it really taught me the value of, no matter what, don't play around with other people's feelings like that. If there are issues, you discuss them, you get them out in the open. But, that gets us into our next song, which is, it really meant a lot to me during that time because the lyrics in the song and sort of the words spoke to me and my particular situation at the time. It took me, about a year to really get over and just, get on with it, so to speak. But it's Third Eye Blind, Losing a Whole Year.
Third Eye Blind, Losing the Whole Year. How do you relax?
It's a great question. You might say that watching Celtic and following Celtic could be relaxing. It's certainly more relaxing at certain times than others, but I'm at a period of time in my life now where, I grew up in Philadelphia and I self-identified so much with the city. And I would talk, at length about the fact that I was never leaving Philadelphia. It was part of me. And, when I met my wife, it was something that was just, it completely changed my perspective from that. My wife was from the Washington, D.C. area, and her work was quite tied into the government here. And my job was much more adaptable, was much more flexible. And so that pretty much summed that up in terms of what was going to have to take place if we were going to wind up being together. And I knew straight away that this was it. I mean, I spent the majority of my 20s. I dated a lot of people, and you sort of get the sense that I'm careless with other people's feelings, and it definitely was not that. It was probably quite the contrary. It was the type of thing where I didn't want to waste anybody's time if it wasn't going to work out. But when I met my wife, it was completely different. It was I need to be with her, otherwise I just deserve to be alone and miserable for the rest of my life. So it was also interesting because my wife and I are very different. My wife comes from the sort of background that is very stable, very normal. She is from an Irish background as well, Irish Catholic, and her family self-identifies as such, which is obviously delightful for me. But it there are some things that you need to reconcile, and one of them is, I'm this kid from Philly, with this sort of jive accent. I'm a smart ass, and I'm dating this girl who's, just the nicest person ever. I mean, she's just, she never has anything bad to say about anybody, no matter what. And let's just say, I don't want to give too much away, but her father and her brother they're involved in the type of businesses that can be quite intimidating. And I had a lot of trepidation about, whether they would accept me and whether they would approve of me, to be dating and then, to marry their daughter. But they've been so kind, in terms of welcoming me, into their family. And we spend a lot of time with them. And it's almost strange to hear that, that you have such a close relationship with your in-laws. Many people have this sort of antagonistic relationship there, but nothing could be further from the truth in my particular circumstance. So, we spend a lot of time with her family and with her sister, who has 2 young children as well. And we're in the process of working on starting our own family as well. So, hopefully that will happen here very, very soon. But at this moment, it's just I have a house now. I like caring for, looking after my house, and just learning about how to fix things, around the house. I mean, I was never, particularly the most handy person ever growing up. I was more destructive than a fixer-upper, if you will. But with the advent of YouTube, as I'm sure you yourself are aware of its powers. But you go on YouTube at any time, and you type in, okay, how do I build a wall, and then there's like typically some guy from the southern United States, like, right, y'all, we're gonna build us a wall today, and then it goes through step by step. You go here and you get that, and then you put that on there, and it's like, oh, well, I can do that, and so I enjoy that, just sort of stretching my comfort zone, and then you have a moment of accomplishment or something that is it's empowering, so. I've become extremely domesticated, but getting into our next song, the context for this is, it gets back to the time when I left Philadelphia. It was such a huge decision for me to make, especially not really knowing if, my now wife's parents were going to approve and whether it was going to be a good fit. But I knew that I just had to do it. And fortunately, it all worked out, and my in-laws are, like I said, just the greatest. So the next song is Bruce Hornsby and the Range. It's Valley Road.
That was Valley Road by Bruce Hornsby. So Graham, what does the future hold for you?
It's interesting because when we started the Beyond the Waves Celtic podcast, we didn't really have any expectations. We thought that it would probably last about 3 shows. People would get a bit of a laugh out of it, and then that would be that. It'd be like, okay, on you go, and then that's basically it. And I never expected so many people to listen and to get such positive feedback. And it's at the point now where we're always constantly trying to evolve in certain little ways to keep it fresh and so on. And it becomes more and more challenging as time goes on. But what really keeps us going is the fact that people always seem to get in touch and say, right, that was a great show, we really appreciate it, and we love listening in. And as long as people keep saying that and doing that, we feel like we should keep it going. So again, I don't really have much of an ambition with this show, other than to give folks, like all of the other Hal Media outlets, and you yourself included, I think we just want to give everybody an alternative to Super Scoreboard or to the other sort of biased media outlets who oftentimes give inaccurate information to suit their agenda. We want to give our own voice, and I think that's really where we're sitting just now. It's just giving voice to ourselves and telling it like it is. For whatever the time calls for. And there's some exciting things coming down the road shortly, where there's video outlets, with documentaries, with these video blogs that take place at the different meetups and conventions and things like that. And there's a lot of exciting possibilities with that. So it's something that, again, we're always trying to evolve and grow with, and as long as, like I said, as long as people enjoy it, we'll continue to do it. At the moment, I'm in the process of hopefully starting a family soon, and it's not easy, doing this. It's not as easy as coming home after a game and turn on a microphone and just spout a bunch of nonsense. There's a lot of preparation that you have to do with it. So, it might be the type of thing that I won't have the sort of time to be able to invest in it. And, I'm sure that there will be somebody else who, could do this sort of thing and provide that kind of outlet. But in the meantime, we're just having a lot of fun doing this.
Excellent. The best of luck with everything you're doing, Graham.
Cheers, pal. 3
more wee questions for you. The first one is, what would you like to see changed in Scotland?
Well, it's a difficult one for me to answer. I mean, I'm obviously not Scottish. I guess my first ancestor that arrived in America was from Scotland with the surname Wilson in 1738. So, I do have an affinity and an affection for Scotland, especially since I've been there twice now in the span of a year. I was there last February for the Juventus game, unfortunately for the outcome. But I just grew to love Scotland for what it provided for the people, and just how just brilliant they were to me as an American. Traveling these days, you never know how you're going to be received when people discover that you're an American. But I was always welcomed, and I just have such a love for the country. But with regard to what would I like to see change, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but the one thing that struck me when I was in Scotland was how when people would ask me what I would think of Scotland, I'd say I love it. It's beautiful. The people are wonderful, and I can't wait to come back. And people would almost unanimously say, "Are you mad? Like, you think Glasgow's lovely? Like, you need to have your head examined." And it's just I would love to see a situation where the Scottish people would understand just how great of a country they have and just how great of a people they are, because it is there, and it is something that I think the entire world really appreciates and will appreciate, and it's something that I think would be a beautiful thing.
Who would you like to have a beer and a chat with from history?
Probably the first person on my list would probably be Benjamin Franklin. Right. He obviously that's from history, but he was obviously formative in the United States gaining its independence from Britain. And it's obviously an opportune time to speak on that, considering the situation just now in Scotland. But he's an amazing person from my perspective in terms of not just what he was involved with, but what he did. He was an inventor. He came up with all sorts of things that were really driven out of irritation with the way things were. He needed 2 separate sets of glasses in order to be able to read and then be able to see in the distance. Well, he just melded 2 sets of glasses together, made them into one, so he only needed 1 set of glasses. And there are modern day bifocal that we use to this day. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, he discovered the power of electricity just by going and flying a kite in a thunderstorm. I mean, if that doesn't tell you something about the people from Philadelphia, I don't know what does. Flying kites in thunderstorms. But he was just an incredibly transformative person in terms of my country and the way that we live in general. And it'd just be amazing to spend just an hour to speak with him about just the way that he looks at life and the way that he thinks about things, because that sort of mentality is always useful no matter what time period you live in.
Your favorite cartoon character, who would that be?
My favorite cartoon character would probably have to be the Roadrunner. I mean, he's just this cheeky little bird. He's fast as lightning. I mean, the Roadrunner would be like the greatest left winger ever. I mean, he just ripped opposing defenders to shreds. But he's always just sort of like 1 step ahead of the poor Coyote. The Coyote's always just trying to get him, and he just falls just short. I think there's an appropriate metaphor here, where Wile E. Coyote, being the now dead Rangers, just came up short, but fell off the cliff. Oh, and then an anvil fell and smashed their head. And the Roadrunner just, beep, beep, and then they're off. That's Celtic. So I like the Roadrunner. That Roadrunner's for me.
Right. Your penultimate song.
My penultimate song is This Time by The Verve.
Right, we've come to the part of the programme where I give you the complete works of Charlie Brown. and and a copy of the Bible to take with you to your island. Would you like a copy of the Bible?
I would love it.
Which other book would you take and why?
The book that I would take would be On the Road by Jack Kerouac, because obviously I'm relegated to this island and it's a wee bit cold, but I hear that it's going to warm up soon. But even though there aren't any roads on this island, Jack Kerouac and the stories of going from boxcar to boxcar as a bit of a drifter will keep my mind in the clouds. So I think that would be the one.
Excellent. A luxury. Something to make your life a bit more bearable on the island. And remember, it can't be a human being and it can't be a mobile phone.
Well, can it be a laptop with some internet? Because I'm going to miss the Celtic.
Oh, no. Because you might set up Skype.
Oh, that's true. Right. Okay. So the item of luxury that I'd bring with me, or that I'd have, would probably be an umbrella. Because obviously, Billy, this is a desert island, so there's not much vegetation, and keeping the sun off my face and elsewhere is kind of a priority. So, and sunscreen's at a minimum as well. So a nice umbrella to cover me up, give me a bit of shade while I'm sitting here enjoying the waves crashing up on the beach.
Fantastic. Your final song, what would that be?
Final song is by New Order, and it's Everything's Gone Green, because essentially for the past 10 years, everything in my life has gone green. It's my favorite color. It's something that I have to wear something that's green every single day, and it's part of my life. And I love New Order, so there you go.
Fantastic. Graham Wilson, thank you very much for being a Desert Island Tim.
Cheers, Billy. All the best.